drafting the pattern, use violin interfacing to draw the pattern on. Use a pen and a ruler. Draw your straight lines first so that you can focus if it moves. Make sure you write in all the markings, the name of the pattern, which pattern piece it is, the size, any other markings that are required to be able to use the pattern. And when you're sketching the curved lines, do it slowly, cutting the fabric. Lay the lower skirt on the fabric fold and pin on the fold area first to keep it in place and line it up. Then pin the rest of the skirt securely so it does not move when you're cutting. As you cut the lower hem edge, make sure it's nice and tidy because that will help when you hem later. When you cut out the inner yoke line, you can put markings in the centre, front and back and the side seams, nipping in 5mm to show these. Lay the yoke on the fold. This is one yoke, pin it, cut it, and then you can place this cut yoke onto another fold of fabric and you can pin it down. It's quite heavy so it'll keep in place, and cut around it for your second yoke. And you can nip in at the top, centre, back and front to show those. If you're going to have tulle, lay your pattern piece on tulle fold and again pin it on the folds so that it's in line and stays in place as you cut it. With the tulle it's a little bit different. Cut the yoke line out first and then we're going to cut out the hem line second, and you want to cut 1 centimetre less than that hem as the tulle layer is not hemmed. It can be left raw and straight. And we're up to sewing. First thing we're going to sew is the skirt yoke. With right sides facing, pin the two yokes together at the sides, and we're going to sew the seam with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and remember to secure at the start and at the end of the seam, and trim your threads when you're finished to keep your work nice and tidy. Repeat this for the other side, and of course you can press it. If you're using woven fabrics, you can press that seam open after you've neatened it. The lower skirt. First thing is to stay stitch the yoke area of the lower skirt. This helps you fit it to the yoke. Sometimes, depending on fabric, it may be loose. And now we're going to join the yoke to the lower skirt. With those markings that you've nipped into the skirt, you can match the yoke seams, side seams to the lower skirt and the centre, front and back. And we make sure the right sides are facing. There's always a trick. Pin them together at the 4 areas that you've marked and pin in between. We're going to sew the seam with a 1 centimetre allowance. Take your time, have the skirt, the lower skirt facing you so you can move it out of the way because this can be quite a bulky seam. And make sure to remove the stay stitching threads at the end. And if you haven't sewn over them, it can be a very easy job, or you might have to unpick them. And once you've done the seam, you can press the seam towards the yoke. I'm using a tailor hem, and it's merino fabric, so I'm just going to press and not move it around too much. Next, we're creating the elastic casing for the single layer skirt. You need to measure the elastic for the waist, including a seam overlap of 2 centimeters, and we're going to join this with a zigzag stitch. Sometimes I do a couple of seams, a square shape even. And then we're going to fold the top of the skirt over the elastic loop with about a 1 centimeter extra fabric we pin down, and that's where we're going to sew the seam to secure the casing. All ready to sew it, and we're going to secure this with zigzag, running stitch, or the twin needle. Sometimes you have to pull the seam to get that elastic to loosen up and not be all bunched up. You can use a blind hemming foot to line yourself up and trim excess fabric from the seam. Next we have the hem edge, 1 centimeter seam allowance for the hem. I use a little ruler gauge to measure a 1 centimeter hem and pin it all the way round, or you may like to just fold it as you sew. This can be sewn with zigzag, running stitch, twin needle, or a decorative stitch. I'm using the twin needle. Means on the top you see 2 lines of stitches straight, and underneath a zigzag, which you need to trim any excess fabric away. Press the seam from the wrong side. Now if we're sewing the tulle layer in, pin the tulle layer on top of one fabric lower skirt, and then you're going to stay stitch it in place and regard it as just one whole lower skirt. And it also means both skirts can be gathered in a little bit at the same time when matching it to a yoke. An encircling skirt style, 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers or more. And this is a little merino matching set. Happy sewing, everybody.